Today, we are going to take a look at this video right here from Second Thought. And for those who don't know, this channel has over 1 million subscribers. As you can see, this particular video has over 400,000 views. As you can see, it was posted on February 19th, 2021, this year, called The Problem with Hyper-Individualism. I'm going to start at a minute 15. Let's check this out.
Have you ever been told to pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Ever heard someone chastise the poor for making bad decisions, or praise the rich for making good ones? How many times have you heard someone assert that the US is the best country on earth because of our individual freedom?
Hell yeah.
These are all part of the same phenomenon, and while present in some cultures outside the US, the mindset is particularly intense here. In this episode, we're going to take a brief look at individualism, and consider why it's a deeply flawed worldview.
Now he says individualism is a deeply flawed worldview, and I would say that it's the correct worldview. Notice how he does not define what individualism is. Before I started around the 115 mark. He starts this video by playing a montage of clips from Republican politicians, right-wing pundits, where they talk about hard work and personal responsibility. But let's define what individualism is. Individualism is the recognition that each person is a sovereign entity capable of reason and rational thought, and they are ultimately responsible for their own life, their own decisions, and their own actions. And this recognition is crucial in establishing a society based on freedom and individual rights.
You're goddamn right.
And you guys need to pay attention to this, because often when I react to Second Thought's videos, I feel the urge to just kind of address and debunk every bullshit talking point that he mentions. But you don't really have to do it with this one, because he pretty much just uses this entire topic to go off on his typical class warfare rambles.
Individualism is in the air we breathe. We watch movies about individual heroes saving the day. We are taught that history is made by individual great men. And we read think pieces about how individuals in poverty make good or bad choices.
Well, only individuals make decisions. After all, there's no such thing as a collective brain or a collective consciousness.
Because this ideology is so universally accepted, it has earned the label of common sense. Even suggesting that individuals may not be primarily, much less entirely responsible for their circumstances is cause for mockery and dismissal. To blame structures or systems or society is seen as childish weakness, as an attempt to shield yourself or others from accountability.
Now, I'm all for criticizing systems and structures. And you notice how when he mentions this, he shows clips of people on the street, homeless encampments.
To blame structures or systems or society is seen as childish weakness.
Right, so we can both note that, one, there are a lot of problems with the system, a lot of structural issues like housing policies, zoning laws, environmental policies that have driven up the cost of living in many areas, how the educational system, schools are not training people to think, they're not preparing people for adulthood. A lot of other factors. Mike Schellenberger just wrote a book on this topic that I want to get into eventually. But we can talk about all of that while also, two, recognizing that your life is ultimately your responsibility.
As an attempt to shield yourself or others from accountability. The trouble is that individualism is an utterly absurd way of explaining the world.
It is an utterly absurd way of explaining the world. I would say individualism is the proper way people should deal with one another. When it comes to establishing a political system and a justice system, yes, people should be judged as individuals. Whether you're accused of a crime, guilty of a crime, or responsible for an achievement.
In 2018, a group of Harvard researchers analyzed data from the US Census and attempted to find correlations between a person's life story and their current income. They discovered that there was such a strong connection between the place someone is born and their future income that they put together a map called the Opportunity Atlas, which shows the median incomes of people born in each zip code, and even predicts what those incomes will be in the future. In 2015, another study found a similar link between your future income and your parents' wealth. The report stated, the wage gap for people from different backgrounds is significant. The expected income of people raised in well-off families in the 90th percentile, that is, the top 90% of the national median household income, is about 200% larger than the expected income of children raised in poor families, in the 10th percentile. percentile, and about 75% larger than that of children raised in middle-class families, in the 50th percentile. What's more, people raised in middle-class families will earn close to double what children from lower-income families earn in adulthood. Put simply, by combining these studies, sociologists are able to predict your lifetime income based on the zip code you were born in and how much money your parents make.
Okay, so first off, who the hell cares? Notice how none of what he says here, or nor the studies that he invokes and cites, disprove the fact that people are individuals. And two, he's making it sound like if you're born into poverty or born into a certain area, that your life is hopeless, when we know this is not true, because how does that explain the fact that America started off as a poor country where everyone was in poverty? And now the standard of living has went through the roof over the last 200 years. This doesn't explain the fact that a lot of immigrants come to America from much poorer countries, much poorer backgrounds than most Americans, and still find ways to rise out of poverty, create wealth. Going back to that first study he cited, the Opportunity Atlas, talks a lot about how the neighborhood you grow up in can make a big difference. It talks about areas like Chicago and Los Angeles specifically. And this is where I might have some agreement with Second Thought. I feel like I should start calling them second-hander. And that structural barriers might be making it difficult for individuals to achieve and rise out of poverty. Again, Chicago and Los Angeles, these are two areas where the kids go to really shitty public schools, where the economic regulations destroy opportunities, drive up the cost of living, at which point you have to ask, what's the solution here? And I would say that the solution is more hyper-individualism and greater respect for individual rights.
You're goddamn right.
And then we have to talk about how he is engaging in the art of cherry-picked statistics, implying that there's little to no economic mobility. This is something that Thomas Sowell, the economist, touched upon in his book, Economic Facts and Fallacies.
Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book. Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book.
I know I mentioned this in a recent video, but he mentions how 3/4 of those Americans whose incomes were in the bottom 20% in 1975 were in the top 40% at some point during the next 16 years. This is something that's also talked about, that Don Watkins and Yaron Brook talk about in their book, Equal is Unfair.
Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book. Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book.
They cite a report from the U.S. Treasury that says its 2007 report found over a period between 1996 to 2005, more than 50% of the poorest families moved up at least one quintile, and around 70% of middle-class families either stayed in the middle class or did even better. As to the question of whether or not kids who are born into richer families, wealthier families, if they have a better shot at making more money in adulthood than kids who grow up in poorer families, there's probably a lot of truth to that. Not going to deny that. Children who are born into richer, wealthier families, they're going to have more resources, more opportunities, probably better opportunities. And some of them, like Vince McMahon, Charles Koch, they're probably going to flourish. And I think that's great. I think that's wonderful, because chances are they're going to be making my life better. They're probably going to be making society better. Then there are many others who probably won't flourish. Many kids who are born into wealth and privilege, unfortunately, squander their advantages and end up living miserable lives, but that's their problem to deal with.
Not based on how hardworking you are, not based on your personal qualities or capitalist instincts. No, the circumstances of your birth are the single largest predictors of your financial success.
Circumstances of birth are the single largest predictor of economic success. So again, I guess if you're born into poverty, you're just doomed, folks. Just doomed to stay there. Just give up. Individualism is a myth. Just wait for champagne socialists like Second-Hander to save you after he and his fellow Lamborghini driving comrades overthrow the capitalist class.
If everyone truly were entirely or even mostly in control of their destiny, if the myth of individualism were true, how could that be possible? The ridiculousness of the equal opportunity and individual success story becomes even clearer when we look at the supposedly self-made people that individualists...
Now, equal opportunity is another straw man. Individualism does not imply equality of opportunity. Now, there should be equality before the law, but you're never going to get equality of opportunity. Even if you were to achieve it on some material level, it would take a great deal of oppression and destroy the standard of living for everyone. We saw this happen in the Soviet Union and in Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge. But even if you were to do it on a material level, you still wouldn't have equality of opportunity because people are born with different strengths and weaknesses, especially in a geographically diverse country like America. Your opportunities are going to differ. If you grow up in, say, Miami Beach, you're probably not going to find a job driving snow plows or opening a business that sells snowblowers.
point to as proof. Elon Musk, supposedly an Iron Man-style brain genius, enjoyed
He is.
family wealth from apartheid businesses, which he has translated into two companies which abuse government subsidies and profit from wasteful non-solutions to climate change.
And I've long been a critic of Elon Musk, but again, you got to think, what's, second thought, he's concerned about climate change, mad that Elon Musk isn't doing it, when we know that Mr. Second Thought, his solution to climate change is destroying capitalism.
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
Bill Gates, the founding father of self-made tech moguls, was one of the first students in America to have his own computers, and had direct connections to tech corporations through his father.
Now let's discuss what he's doing here, what Second Thought is doing here. Let's focus on Bill Gates, because I've talked about Elon Musk and his cronyism a lot. What Second Thought is doing is he's oversimplifying what led to Bill Gates' achievement in effort to undermine and discredit his achievement. He wants to credit it all to circumstance. Saying if Bill Gates, implying that if Bill Gates, if he did not have connections, if he did not have earlier access to computers than most Americans, then he probably would not be as economically successful. Maybe that's true. I think it's a gigantic waste of fucking time to squabble over such hypotheticals, but sure, maybe if Bill Gates were born 10 years earlier, if he were born to different parents, well, then he wouldn't be Bill Gates, which is really what you get at here. If he were born in another city, another country, maybe he would not have made billions of dollars developing and selling software. Sure. And if Neil Armstrong were born in 13th century Italy before the existence of Isaac Newton, he probably never would have landed on the moon. If Wayne Gretzky were born in Arizona in the 1930s, he probably would not have grown up to become the legendary hockey player that he became. You could apply this ridiculous line of reasoning to literally anyone to say, well, actually, you just had the right circumstances.
Blow it out your ass.
But those are just modern examples. If you'd like a truly telling example, a 2016 study found that between the years 1427 and 2016, Florence, Italy has been ruled by the same families. That is...
You hear that, guys? Florence has been ruled by the same families for 600 years. That means individualism is not real.
That's just not smart.
This is what I was talking about earlier. I don't know how true this anecdote is, but I know one thing. It does not disprove the fact that people are, in fact, individuals. Imagine telling this to Thomas Jefferson when he was drafting the Declaration of Independence, writing all that cool stuff about how all men are created equal and are endowed with certain inalienable rights. And then some knucklehead like Second Thought coming along to Thomas Jefferson to say, well, actually, if you look at a place like France that's been ruled by the same family for centuries.
Well, excuse me, princess.
Oh, good point. Sorry for coming up with revolutionary ideas on how to establish a country.
is a period of 600 years, at least 12 generations, in which the plague, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, 2 world wars, the creation of capitalism, and modern technology itself has failed to disrupt Florence's structures of wealth and power. If the story of individual hard work determining success, or the inverse story of laziness causing failure, were true, surely one child in those 12 generations of Florentine elites would have been born without the magical hard work juice which we are told determines success.
So there's a lot to say here. I think he's conflating wealth with success, and I don't think those are the same thing. I think it kind of reveals what Second Thought thinks of success. But he mentions magical hard work juice. And I think when he mentions that and you look at all the other points he makes throughout this, I think the real issue at hand is not individualism, which I don't think he believes in, but the bigger issue at hand is free will versus determinism. The study he cites about how if you're born in the wrong zip code and if you're born to parents who don't make a lot of money, you're just destined. Sociologists can predict how your life's going to turn out. If Bill Gates creates a successful company, it's because the circumstances lined up perfectly for him. Also mentioned at one point about how people don't have control over their own destiny. And also considering the fact that this guy's a fan of Marx, it wouldn't surprise me if he's a determinist.
The notion of equal opportunity we are constantly being sold on is incompatible with any heritable family wealth, much less 600 years of it. And what about bigotry? How can we claim that anyone has enough power over their life path to punish them for failure when we know for a fact that racism, sexism, and discrimination wildly change your opportunities in life?
Well, racism is a consequence of collectivism. It is a form of collectivism, as is sexism, not individualism.
Being a woman drastically affects your likely type of future employment, decreases your future income, and determines whether you spend years of your life doing domestic work, both paid and unpaid. Black Americans are born with roughly 8 times less family wealth, are underrepresented in elections, even after votes are counted, and are far more likely to face both hiring and workplace discrimination compared to white Americans. Race and employment type are deeply linked. In 2019, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics found that Hispanic Americans are nearly twice as likely to work service, construction, or industrial jobs as their white peers.
Again, with the art of the cherry-picked statistic, how does this explain the fact that immigrants are overrepresented in high-income fields like medicine and engineering? Immigrants are also overrepresented in Silicon Valley CEOs. In fact, there was an article the other day that talks about this because Twitter just got a new CEO. And the article mentions about how Indian origin people account for just 1% of the U.S. population and 6% of Silicon Valley's workforce, and yet are disproportionately represented in the top brass. Going on to say later in the article about how Indian-born Silicon Valley CEOs are also part of a 4 million strong minority group that is among the wealthiest and most educated in the United States. About 1 million of them are scientists and engineers. More than 70% of H-1B visas issued by the U.S. go to Indian software engineers, and 40% of all foreign-born engineers in cities like Seattle come from India.
And therefore twice as likely to face the health problems that kind of employment causes. Health outcomes, including life expectancy and future mental health issues, are connected to your race, your gender identity, and the zip code you were born in.
You hear that? Health outcomes, including life expectancy, mental health issues, are linked to the place you were born, your gender identity, your race. Again, going back to what I said about free will versus determinism, sounds a lot like race determinism he's talking about here.
Black communities, as one example, are far more likely to be subjected to toxic lead paint and unclear water, both of which can cause lifelong illnesses. Transgender people are much more likely to face depression as a result of being unable to transition or because of the bigotry they face from some corners of society. Both groups are more likely to be murdered outright, often by the police, and far less likely to have those murders solved. Conservatives and liberals alike have been repeating for generations that individuals, not structures, are to blame for human suffering.
Again, I think this is another straw man. The ideal should be a society based on individuals, and we can analyze how structures and systems are responsible for human suffering, or how it's responsible for making it difficult for individuals to flourish. But Second Thought's entire argument here is because the system is flawed, therefore individualism is not real.
That's just not smart.
Reagan proclaimed that government is the problem, never the solution. Thatcher asserted that there is no such thing as society. But if this is the case, if the storybook protagonist-centered tales we tell are real, how can we possibly explain the mountains of statistically significant links between race, poverty, gender, and birth location to future health, wealth, and happiness? How can we explain why some countries, namely the ones with more socialist policies, have such low rates of poverty and homelessness? Why?
Did you guys notice what he did there? I'm going to slow it down for a second. He said that countries with more socialist policies have lower rates of poverty and homelessness. And he showed 2 clips of 2 different countries to articulate this.
Birth location to future health, wealth, and happiness. How can we explain why some countries,
Denmark is the first one, often used.
namely the ones with more socialist...
Look at the second one. Isn't that interesting? For those who don't know, that is communist China. I think that's particularly Shanghai. And he's crediting China as a country with more socialist policies that has lower rates of poverty and homelessness. Does anyone honestly think that poor people in China have a higher standard of living than poor people in the United States?
Yeah, to the no, yeah, to the no, to the no, no, no.
And consider that this video was made this year, 2021, after the Hong Kong protests, after the growing knowledge of the Uyghur concentration camps in China. But hey, apparently life for poor people in China is better than poor people in the United States, so. Which it's not, but then going back to his original point, countries with more socialist policies. I guess we're to include countries like Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea. Those are countries that have more socialist policies. Do those countries also have lower rates of poverty and homelessness?
Yeah, to the no, yeah, to the no, to the no, no, no.
Policies have such low rates of poverty and homelessness, while others hop from crisis to crisis every year. Could it be coincidence, sheer chance, or, as argued by the likes of Ben Shapiro, pseudoscientific debunked bigotry?
Well, I would say these crises are often caused by government intervention in the economy, often in the name of collectivism and helping the less fortunate.
The most basic facts of modern life utterly contradict anti-systemic individualist thinking. To highlight...
Notice how we're 7 minutes in and he is still not dealt with individualism as a concept? Just citing studies with statistics? Okay.
that contradiction, let's try to explain these facts with individualist logic. Women and non-white people, by sheer coincidence, all individually chose to be paid less for more demanding jobs.
They all chose to be paid less. So, of course, if you were to point to a musician like Jewel, who she just made an appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience, and I saw a clip of it, where she talks about how she was turning down million-dollar contracts by various record companies while she was living in her car. And she explained this because she wanted to study. She wanted to read up on the record industry. She was using her downtime to go to her local library while she was living out of her car to read up on the record industry to make sure she was not getting herself into a bad record deal. Now, of course, if you were to bring this up to someone like Second Thought, I'm sure he would say something like, well, actually, if she did not have the connections in the local coffee shop that gave her free stage time,
Blow it out your ass.
sure, you would play that card. Also made me think of this article that was just put out last week on Fortune. Female founders are crashing the billionaire club. And it talks about the rise of entrepreneurs like Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx. Also, other entrepreneurs like Whitney Wolfe Herd, who created Bumble, and Ann Wojcicki, who created 23andMe. Found out Ann Wojcicki is actually the sister of Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube. Looked into their life history, found out that they're the children of immigrant Stanley Wojcicki, who actually came to the United States from Poland after the communists took over, the likes of Second Thought took over. I thought that was an interesting story, but the thing is if you look into all of these, from what I've seen, all of these women come from pretty affluent backgrounds. So I'm sure if you were to use these as an example to say, look, these women aren't choosing to get paid less. These women they're crushing it. And then Second Thought's probably going to bring up that one study he mentioned about how if you're born into a rich, wealthier family, you have more opportunities. Notice how he wants it both ways here. Hyper-individualism, it's to blame for racism. It's to blame for women getting paid less, apparently. It's to blame for the plight of the poor, and it's impossible to achieve unless you're a white male or you're rich. But if you happen to make something of yourself, it's not because of your own effort or your own due diligence or your own hard work. No, it's because you were given the right circumstances. How convenient.
Also, by coincidence, they chose to work those jobs and be paid less than women and non-white people.
Again, with the art of the cherry-picked statistic that proves nothing, So he's comparing the McDonald's starting wage in the US at $8 an hour, although that's not entirely true. Some locations do pay more than others. And he's comparing it with the starting pay of Denmark. But it doesn't say the starting pay for particularly women or non-whites. But again, even if what he were saying were true, what's the solution here? Wouldn't the solution be more individualism, judging job applicants as individuals rather than their gender or their ethnicity? I mean, it's amazing that he says this as if the sitting vice president and speaker of the House, two of the most powerful positions in government, are not women who make well beyond six figures. How did that happen?
Really makes you think.
People in other similarly developed countries. Simultaneously, people born in the same zip codes all just happened to make choices that led them to similar incomes, similar lifespans, and similar rates of disease. Those born to poor families chose, with little or no outside influence, to work lower-paying jobs. The rich also chose, of their own accord and without significant systemic advantages, to work higher-paying jobs. The huge differences in the inequalities between America and other wealthy nations is also a coincidence, caused by Americans choosing to be lazier. Rather than consider that centuries of enslavement and systemic racism has sabotaged the quality of life for Black Americans.
Now he's bringing up systemic racism. Again, was the systemic racism a consequence of individualism or collectivism? I talk about this issue in depth in my video, White Supremacy is Embedded in Capitalism, the title being one of the arguments that I respond to when making that video. I bring up a lot of receipts to show how the systemic racism in America is not an embrace of America's individualism ideal, but rather a deviation from it.
Individualists insist that Black individuals choose to live in poverty more frequently than non-Black people. Rather than consider that society exists, individualists have created a web of absurdities and...
They don't say that society doesn't exist. I think even Thatcher said this, that society is merely a collection of individuals.
You're goddamn right.
chosen to live there. They also insist that none of these absurdities are racist, sexist, or classist.
Second thought is the one living in a world of absurdities.
Temper our language here. Anyone who claims that individual choices rather than systems entirely determine how most people live should be dismissed outright.
The irony here is that second thought is totally in favor of a political system that determines how everyone lives.